The Tinderbox Part 2. It was a lovely town, and he put up at the finest inn and demanded the very best rooms and all the food he liked, for he was rich now that he had so much money. The servant who was to polish his boots thought, of course, that they were queer old boots for such a rich gentleman to have, for he hadn't bought any new ones yet. The next day he got boots to walk in and pretty clothes. Now the soldier had become a fine gentleman, and they told him about all the things to do in their town, and about their king, and what a lovely princess his daughter was. "Where can she be seen?" asked the soldier. "She can't be seen at all," they said. "She lives in a big copper castle with many walls and towers around it. No one but the king is allowed to go in and out, for it had been prophesied that she will be married to a common soldier, and the king can't stand that one bit." "I'd like to see her, all right," thought the soldier, but this he wasn't allowed to do at all. Now he lived merrily and well, went to the theater, drove in the royal park, and gave lots of money away to the poor, and that was well done. He remembered very well from the old days how bad it was to be penniless. Now he was rich and had fine clothes and many friends, who all said that what a nice fellow he was, a real cavalier, and the soldier certainly didn't mind hearing that. But as he spent money every day and didn't get any money back at all, it happened that at last he had no more than 2 shillings left, and had to move from the nice rooms where he had lived to a tiny little room way up under the roof. And he had to brush his boots himself and mend them with a needle. And none of his friends came to see him, for there were so many stairs to climb. One evening, it was quite dark, and he couldn't buy even a candle. But then he remembered there was a little stub in the tinder box he had taken out of the hollow tree where the witch had helped him. He took out the tinder box and the candle stub, but just as he struck a light and the sparks flew from the flint, the door flew open, and the dog with eyes as big as teacups, which he had seen down under the tree, stood before him and said, "What does my master command?" "What's that?" said the soldier. "Why, this is a funny tinder box if I can get whatever I like. Get me some money," he said to the dog, and whoops, it was gone. Whoops, it was back again, holding a bag full of coins in its mouth. Now the soldier understood what a marvelous tinder box it was. If he struck it once, the dog that sat on the chest full of copper money came. If he struck it twice, the one with the silver money came, and if he struck it 3 times, the one with the gold came. Now the soldier moved back down to the lovely rooms again, put on the fine clothing, and then all his friends knew him again right away, and they were so fond of him. Then one day he thought, "Now it's really quite odd that no one is allowed to see the princess. Everyone says she's supposed to be so lovely, but what's the good of it when she always has to sit inside that big copper castle with all the towers? Can't I even get to see her at all? Now, where's my tinder box?" And then he struck a light, and whoops, there stood the dog with eyes as big as teacups. "I know it's the middle of the night," said the soldier, "but I'd also like to see the princess, just for a tiny moment." The dog was out of the door at once, and before the soldier had given it a thought, it was back again with the princess. She sat on the dog's back and was asleep, and she was so lovely that anyone could see that she was a real princess. The soldier couldn't resist. He had to kiss her, for he was a real soldier. Then the dog ran back again with the princess. But in the morning, when the king and queen were having their tea, the princess said that she had dreamed such a remarkable dream last night about a dog and a soldier. She had ridden on a dog, and the soldier had kissed her. That was a pretty story indeed, said the queen. Now, one of the old ladies in waiting was to keep watch by the princess's bed the next night to see if it really were a dream or what it could be. The soldier wanted very much to see the lovely princess again, and so the dog came during the night, took her, and ran as fast as he could. But the old lady in waiting pulled on a pair of rubber boots and ran after it just as fast. When she saw that they disappeared inside a big house, she drew a big cross on the door with a piece of chalk. Then she went home and went to bed, and the dog came back with the princess. But when it saw that a cross had been made on the door, it also took a piece of chalk and made crosses on all the doors in the city. And that was wise, for now, of course, the lady in waiting couldn't find the right door when there was a cross on every single one. Early the next morning, the king and the queen, the old lady in waiting, and all the other officers came to see where the princess had been. "There it is," said the king when he saw the first door with a cross on it. "No, there it is, my dear husband," said the queen, who saw the second door with a cross on it. "But there's one, and there's one," they all said. No matter where they looked, there was a cross on the door. So then they could see that there was no use searching one bit. But the queen was a very wise woman who knew about more than just riding in the royal coach. She took her big golden scissors, cut up a large piece of silk, and sewed a lovely little bag. This she filled with small, fine grains of buckwheat, tied it to the princess's back, and when that was done, clipped a tiny hole in the back so the grain could dribble out all along the way, wherever the princess went. That night the dog came again, took the princess on its back, and carried her straight to the soldier, who had fallen in love with her and gladly would have been a prince so he could make her his wife. The dog didn't notice at all how the grains dribbled out all the way from the castle to the soldier's window, where it ran up the wall with the princess. In the morning, the king and queen saw where their daughter had been, all right, and so they took the soldier and put him in jail. There he sat. How dark and dreary it was. And then they said to him, "Tomorrow you're to be hanged." That wasn't a nice thing to hear, and he had forgotten his tinderbox back at the inn. In the morning, through the bars in the tiny window, he could see the people hurrying out of the city to see him hanged. He heard drums and saw the soldiers marching. Everybody was rushing out, including a shoemaker's apprentice in his leather apron and slippers, who was in such a hurry that one of his slippers flew off and landed near by the wall where the soldiers sat peering out through the iron bars. "Hey there, shoemaker's boy, you needn't be in such a hurry," said the soldier. "Nothing will happen until I get there, but if you'll run to my lodgings and fetch my tinderbox, you'll get 4 shillings. But then you must really run." The shoemaker's boy was only too glad to have 4 shillings, and he scurried away after the tinderbox and gave it to the soldier. And yes, now we shall hear. Outside the city, a big gallows had been built. Around it stood the soldiers and many hundreds of thousands of people. The king and the queen sat on a lovely throne right above the judge and the whole court. The soldier was already on the ladder, but as they were going to put the noose around his neck, he said, "Oh yes, a sinner is always granted one little innocent wish before he receives his punishment. He would so like to smoke a pipeful of tobacco. After all, it would be the last pipe he'd have in his world." The king couldn't really say no to that, and so the soldier took out his tinderbox and struck a light. 1, 2, 3, and there stood all the dogs, the first with eyes as big as teacups, the second with eyes as big as mill wheels, and the third with eyes each as big as the round tower. "Help me now, so I won't be hanged," said the soldier. And then the dogs flew right at the judge and the whole court, took one by the legs and one by the nose, and tossed them many miles up in the air, so they fell down and broke into pieces. "I won't," said the king. But the biggest dog took both him and the queen and threw them after all the others. Then the soldiers were frightened, and all the people shouted, "Little soldier, you shall be our king and have the lovely princess." Then they put the soldier in the king's coach, and all the three dogs danced in front and shouted, "Hurrah!" And all the boys whistled through their fingers, and the soldiers presented arms. The princess came out of the copper castle and was made queen, and that she liked very well. The wedding party lasted 8 days, and the dogs sat at the table and made eyes at everybody.